Hey guys, it's Guthrie's Auto Repair, and today I'm working on a 2012 Chevy Equinox. The customer actually brought it to me saying that the exhaust manifold is leaking. So we went ahead and got the exhaust manifold and the gasket. But what I want to do, what I'm really concerned about, is seeing the trouble codes that the engine is setting to make sure that when we do this repair, it verifies that we fixed the vehicle. The battery was low on this one, so I went ahead and hooked up my jump box. I'm about to actually hook up my Icon T8 and get the codes. Okay, these are the codes I got when I scanned the vehicle. I really want to focus on code P0172 and P0191. These codes I don't think are going to be remedied with the exhaust manifold that I'm about to replace, and here's why. A cracked exhaust manifold is going to let fresh air into the system, so the O2 sensor is going to pick up on that oxygen, meaning that it's going to actually detect a fuel trim system lean. So that's what I believe, but I want you guys to watch and see what occurs during this repair. Get these perfect. Good. There you go. Very nice. There it comes. Interested in how bad this thing actually is. Most of the time, it splits right here. And it's cracked, but it's not a full split. Okay, it's the next day. I've already got everything put back together in the engine bay. What I want to do is verify the fix and make sure that when we clear codes, we test drive it and we see if our rich condition is now resolved. I have a feeling like this is going to not resolve it though. I know all the low power codes, that's from our battery being low. Let's clear codes. You know what, I'm gonna just go ahead and start it, see what happens. There we go. I don't see our rich condition here. The customer said when he drove this vehicle to my house, it was struggling. So let's see where fuel trims are at once again while we're at idle in park. I did feel a little hesitation. The whole car just shut off. What just happened? Oh my goodness. No codes. Why did it just randomly die? That makes 0 sense. Okay, after test driving the car again, I am getting these same 2 codes. Why am I getting these same 2 codes? The car stalls at stoplights, red lights, or sometimes goes into limp mode. So you can see here I go through a little bit of a crisis, collect more data, and I actually want to share that with you guys and show you my mistake when I was diagnosing this car and what I found out. Okay, I just went through each injector on the fuel rail of this thing and made sure they were reading about 1.9 to 2.3 ohms. Every single one of them read 2.2. Also, I'm about to check the pins at the high pressure fuel pump itself. Okay, as you can see, I had the car completely torn apart there for a second, and I actually got the original fuel rail pressure sensor from the customer because he had changed it out himself for a standard brand fuel rail pressure sensor. So I changed it back to the GM one and did a fuel rail pressure sensor test, and by that I mean I shut the in-tank fuel pump off on the low side so that the engine was starved for fuel, and I was able to get the fuel pressure sensor to read close to zero, which actually when it ran out of fuel and the engine died when I shut the fuel pump off, it actually dropped to 14.7 psi, meaning that it read atmospheric pressure, meaning that this fuel rail pressure sensor that the customer just changed out was still good. So here is a graph that I got while duplicating the symptom that I have reoccurring at stoplights. You can see that the peach colored line is my engine speed, the yellow colored line is my actual fuel rail pressure sensor reading, and the purple line is the in-tank fuel pump pressure readings, and the blue line is the desired fuel rail pressure that we're supposed to be getting. And that is the command that the ECM is giving out to the high pressure fuel pump to regulate the pressure. Now at frame 760, you can see the ECM begins to give the command of 0 psi. And you can see my peach colored line, I am at idle around 700 RPMs. The yellow line, my fuel rail pressure sensor, the actual, is starting to drop and crest down to about 290 psi. The engine stalls. You can see the peach line flat lines, and then you can see where I start the engine back up, and it is now in limp mode. You can also see here that my short-term fuel trim is completely pegged back at negative 27%, and my long-term fuel trim is pulled back at negative 25%. This means that the oxygen sensor is picking up a rich condition reading and is trying to pull back fuel because it is so rich. Here is a screenshot of heated oxygen sensor 1 and 2 pegged out to 930 millivolts and 970 millivolts after the symptom is replicated, and you can see based off of these numbers the oxygen sensors are definitely reading a rich condition. The high pressure fuel pump is a mechanical one-cylinder design driven by an additional 3-lobe cam on the camshaft. High pressure fuel is regulated by the high pressure fuel pump actuator, which is part of the high pressure fuel pump. The conditions for running the DTC P0191, this is condition 1, and why is this important? This is important because this tells us the strategy that the ECM uses whenever you come to a stop, and I'll explain why. The engine is not cranking, the ignition voltage is greater than 11 volts, the vehicle speed is less than or equal to 0.62 miles per hour, the low side fuel pressure is greater than or equal to 40 psi, and the accelerator pedal position is 0% for 12.5 seconds. So what does this mean for me? Well, when I come to a stop, I can usually count 12 seconds, and by that time, just like this strategy says, code P0191 is set, and the engine goes into limp mode. So the high pressure fuel rail sensor is actually detecting an issue whenever I come to a stop after 12.5 seconds and sets the P0191. Within the first 6 seconds of coming to a stop, the engine will start to hesitate. So given the high pressure fuel pump description and operation and the conditions for setting code P0191, I completely missed the fact that when the ECM desires 0 psi on the fuel rail pressure, and then the fuel rail pressure sensor actual drops to 290, it is actually wanting the fuel rail pressure sensor to read anywhere from 40 to 70 psi, just like the low side fuel pressure sensor. Also, gathering more information from the customer, come to find out the customer had actually replaced the original high pressure fuel pump because it was leaking fuel into the oil. So the customer replaced the high pressure fuel pump with an Oreillys aftermarket high pressure fuel pump. Apparently this is a huge red flag in the aftermarket world, because these high pressure fuel pumps are known to fail if they are aftermarket and are not a GM, genuine, or an OEM high pressure fuel pump. AC Delco makes these high pressure fuel pumps, and they have a very intricate design in how they operate. So after these diagnostics are done by me, I have come to the conclusion that the high pressure fuel pump has somehow failed, but I couldn't prove why until now after looking back at the data and recording this video and looking at the description and operation and seeing the data that I recorded after replacing the high pressure fuel pump with an OEM high pressure fuel pump. So here's the data I collected and recorded on my Icon T8 after replacing the high pressure fuel pump. I mean, this thing is idling like a dream. Awesome. Perfect. I mean, that's amazing. Look at that. Look at that. So the desired dropped to 0, and it finally I got it to do it correctly on the fuel rail pressure, and it desires 0. You see it commands 0. You should watch the fuel rail pressure sensor drop down to your low side pressure. It should be anywhere from 40 to 70 psi. On the old high pressure fuel pump, you would see desired go to 0, and the fuel rail pressure sensor would only drop to 290. That is when the O2 sensor pegged rich, because there's so much pressure in the rail that when you come to a stop and it's desiring that 0 and it doesn't drop all the way to low side pressure, then fuel injectors are flooding the engine. It is literally flooding the engine so bad that it's either stalling it or going into limp mode. Alright guys, well I hope this video helps you out if you're trying to diagnose an issue with a P0191 and a P0172. Like I said with the description of the high pressure fuel pump, that regulator is built into the high pressure fuel pump, and there is also an inlet valve which is controlled by the ECM that is built into the high pressure fuel pump. What part of the high pressure fuel pump failed? I would like to say that it was the inlet, but it could have also been the regulator. Obviously the pressure relief as well. That's another thing, is the rail was building so much pressure when the ECM was giving the command 0, desired 0 psi. It didn't drop. It didn't drop enough or sufficiently within enough time to keep the engine running when you come to a stop. So this kind of explains how it should function, not necessarily why it failed. Or why this aftermarket fuel pump was not good. A high pressure fuel pump was not a good one. So just keep that in mind while you're diagnosing it, and I hope this video helps you out. I already went through the headache of all this, so I hope you guys don't have to.